2001, A Space Odyssey, 1968, as discussion of faking of the Apollo lunar missions, 1968 to 72, by Sean McHugh, revised August 2026, part 2 of 3. In a sad moment, Floyd calls his home on a video telephone and speaks to his infant daughter, where in representing the elite, he shows confusion and poor communication. He asks for her mother, but who has deliberately gone shopping to make herself unavailable for the specific hour and 10 minutes he has before the space station is at the point in its orbit for a launch to the moon. The daughter, who has noticed the basic situation, says she wants a telephone for her birthday, as indicating her parents aren't communicating properly, as including on this telephone call. This is out of his excessive deceit, but which suits his occupation, while he seems to lack the sensitivity to notice or care about his wife's actions, or notice what his daughter is seeing and saying, and only continues in his blithe, fast-talking, and presumed authority. Moreover, the daughter has seemingly been left with her older sister Rachel, who's gone to the bathroom so not to take the call, as not being on good terms with him either, with his deceit and having discussed the probability of his call with her mother. She would hear the conversation, but keeps away and quiet, so Floyd settles for speaking to his infant and leaving a message with her at the end, when she's still only learning to speak. Floyd telephoning his wife, but failing, and the daughter asking for a telephone in only a metaphorical communication device breakdown. Then repeats when Hal tries to communicate with the crew, and on failing reports a communication device breakdown. Floyd, as a part of mission control, should be thinking this through to explain Hal's seeming antenna mistake, but they just report Hal as being in error and try to deal with the surprise, while the crew are as brainless and brutish as Floyd and the elite behind him. When Floyd dismisses the new telephone, she asks for a bush baby as a small nocturnal primate, because the small girl has to operate in the dark, away from her antagonistic parents and sister. Bush babies further have myths of kidnapping people, and hence taking her away somewhere else. But again, Floyd is clueless. Her parents and Hal's makers provide inputs to their offspring that they can't deal with, and cause them to withdraw inwardly, while as an infant, she's also the character closest to the more aware baby at the end of the film. After the phone call, Floyd meets the Russians, who have just spent 3 months calibrating a new antenna at their own Chalinko moon base, this being a lengthy period to get a communication device working, as showing their own communication problems. It also draws attention to the antennas for the 6 Apollo landings needing little or no calibration at all to work, despite the uneven ground for the lander and the rover bouncing around. Then they tell him of a parallel communication problem with Clavius, where phone calls there aren't getting through, all as Floyd's call right before didn't get through to his wife, and he replies they're probably having some trouble with their equipment. He knows, however, that Clavius is choosing not to communicate, all as he's not communicating properly in his reply here, even while not seeing his wife is choosing not to communicate. Again, a fault in a communication device is reported when there is none, prefigures Hal and his antenna, while Hal is hidden inside the name Chalinko. Moreover, the equipment failure on Discovery as being an antenna issue is accordingly never spoken about directly, and is only evident by seeing the astronauts approach it. The Russians first considered similar equipment trouble to theirs at Clavius, but after one of their rocket buses was also denied an emergency landing there, they appear to consider the false story released about it having an epidemic of unknown origin. Likewise, the crew at first accept Hal telling them there was equipment trouble. Then later, Bowman's pod's return to Discovery is denied. The moon monolith as the dubious communication device of a screen, which is then subject to deception and poor communication, converts to the whole film on its screen as an artistic communication device over Apollo, but where there was poor communication with most of the audience due to their modest criticality. Elena mentions to Floyd that she doesn't see her implied husband Grigor often, as in a parallel with Floyd's wife not seeing him. Grigor is doing underwater research in the Baltic Sea, where an anomaly on the seabed, resembling an ancient spaceship, was officially discovered in 2011, and hence an alien artifact buried in water rather than Earth. He's not on the space station or moon because he's assigned to a real project, where communication with the fake project is drifting apart. Working on an antenna,
Spousal separation, and Floyd's daughter were all in Elena's mind for her to mention due to her listening in on his phone conversation, as also having their antenna communication device expertise to set up one for the phone tapping, and probably for the last 3 months as also in her mind. Moreover, the Russians have to walk past the booth to sit down and could look through the glass to see the daughter on the screen.
On finding it's just a family call, they stop listening and are seen only waiting for him, while the unheard second call that he indicates he'll make may be to another love interest, as aligning with his marital problems, and again of less urgency to the Russians. Elena then greets him before the man Smyslov insists on giving him his chair, as to place Floyd between him and Elena, and inquires about his business. The arrangements for Floyd not being at liberty to discuss the situation at Clavius with the Russians are then applied for Hal not being at liberty to discuss the situation at Jupiter, and subsequently showing the problems with the reasoning involved. Floyd and the Russians deceive each other, but the Russians may further know or suspect that the epidemic is deliberately false, and are only pretending not to know to keep him feeling superior and on good terms. Floyd thinks he's dealing with his interaction with the group well enough with his evasiveness over the epidemic story, but appears not to consider they have wider strategies against him. The continuation of East-West international antagonisms is also indicated by the 4 Earth-orbiting weapons at the start of the space station sequence. The international political antagonisms did indeed continue through to 2001 and beyond, despite the Soviet Union dissolving itself 10 years prior, as it was always fake at the highest levels and only pursued by the interconnected elite on both sides out of their equivalent set of interests. The war is purely on the tiers of society below them, while the elite clink glasses and chuckle. They cooperate to provide ongoing fake, scary external threats as distractions to be placed before attention to domestic social injustice and background hierarchical privilege. These include the Cold War, nuclear war, terrorism, and epidemics or pandemics that need mass media lies on screens to push since they're invisible and just more fake communication breakdown issues. Apollo also copies the fake Clavius quarantine on the moon, with the first 3 crews returning from landings on the moon alleged to have gone into quarantine on their return. The ceiling here is a grid 6 squares wide that becomes 8 squares by the Russians' table, as referencing the adversarial complexities of the Russian national game of chess, and also appears above the meeting with the deceptive Miller. Then Smyslov is for Smyslov, the surname of Russian father and son chess grandmasters, including the son's 2 years world champion 10 years prior to the film. This compares with the equivalent Stargate room floor, plus the Hal and Poole chess game, while Kubrick was also a strong player. Finally, Elena hopes to see Floyd at an IAC conference as an international, and hence open council, and hence hints that the openness Smyslov urges for over Clavius is rightful, and that they don't care for his American National Council with its own maneuvers. Her name issues from Greek words for light and the moon. However, the only facial close-up in the conversation is of Smyslov, which begins with a covert quarter turn of his head as Miss Turner walks by in parallel with the quarter turn of the covert monolith screen. The minor reorientation needed for the lunar monolith to be understood as Apollo being screened propaganda is also given by the photographer at the monolith turning his camera after each of his 3 completed photos to a horizontal position and back. The mounted camera to his side also has a monolith-shaped aperture. The monolith being deliberately buried, as Floyd and Halvorsen remark, is the burying and cover-up of Apollo, as only on a screen. Then disinterred, it parallels the ape-like, less conscious following anything exposed at the cultural surface, particularly via screens, and where the audiovisual screen has been waiting across time to be invented. Moreover, the monolith is near Tycho crater, which is circular with a central mountain, to compare with Hal's circular lens and central light. The excavation pit resembles an audiovisual studio with rectangular artificial lights in the truthful horizontal position, Apollo on the moon being only a film setup, as on the moon. The pit as viewed is vertical monolith-shaped, and accordingly, the astronauts walk down a long ramp into it, comparing with cinema theaters, while there's another ramp in the opposite corner, all as the monolith and wider 2001 film can be approached either as science fiction propaganda for Apollo and space travel or critique of it. Moreover, the three vertical monoliths, with their potential to become artistic horizontal screens, represent revelatory doors to walk through, with indeed Bowman passing through the Stargate at the end. Then enlightenment from sexuality as immediate intuitive response that circumvents intellectual reasoning and deception on the surface of situations is given by sexualized vaginal doorways, again from Forbidden Planet. This is primarily in Floyd's moonship door, with its vertical opening widening towards the center, inside a circular area with inner and outer sections, plus a top bulge and bottom pathway, given with a woman hostess, while the central door design is also for the door to the saloon. It's prefigured by the space station hub docking circle, with monolith opening alongside its phallic approaching ship, and with both these door sequences accompanied by the Blue Danube, with its sultry courtship purposes. It's further in the prior ship to the space station, before the design is repeated across the revelatory monolith's excavation pit walls and elsewhere. Then it's in the pod bay, where the white pods are semen drops about to leave the body from the ship's bulbous end, and with the overall ship design comprising a small sperm journeying towards the large egg of Jupiter for Bowman as a new baby after his worldview is annihilated by the Apollo deception revealed. Again, as in Forbidden Planet, there are also short vaginal tunnels in the moonship, and 4 in Discovery, including with the end door and monolith shapes, while the outside and inside of Bowman's pod at the rear say "Warning, explosive bolts," all as he is to be bolted into realization, with Hal turning against him. Bowman is then ejaculated as explosive bolts into one of these tunnels as an entrance from outside in, a combination of mental and sexual realization. Moreover, the dharmic Hindu god Shiva's foremost expression is a lingam, or phallic symbol, a monolithic, although cylindrical block of black stone, and aligning with the enlightening monoliths as sexual doorways. The ship is furthermore a skull with backbone vertebrae, in line with the television news description of Hal as the brain and central nervous system of the ship, and in line with the film as a vehicle aiding the more capable mind who has backbone. For the less capable, it's a ball and chain. While Floyd's ship to the moon also compares with Discovery's head and the pods. Floyd's names Haywood and Floyd mean a hedge-enclosed wood, and gray all, as he's sent to the moon to cordon off the truth of the silver-gray screen. He's the only passenger in his chartered ships to the space station and moon, while everyone is deferential to him, including even the moon ship captain, although he reads toilet instructions on a vertical monolith-shaped sign, all as the elite's overly rational thinking with their Apollo propaganda are fit only for the toilet. The briefing meeting room has stark white horizontal monolith-shaped walls as Apollo whitewashing via mass media screens, although the walls further have curtains at their sides as cinema screens for thinking critically if the viewer can. There's a vertical lectern for the dubious talk he'll give, plus gray monolith ceiling. Floyd's arguments in his preface to the meeting for maintaining an epidemic cover story are weakly developed, all as the arguments for faking Apollo based on fear of lower social tiers displacing the elite. The epidemic is only an epidemic of ideas about Apollo, with a basis in nothing but initial propaganda. Moreover, Floyd, as Hal, as the elite, is given by being introduced by Dr. Halverson, whose name includes Hal, his head framed by the Hal lectern before speaking, watching 2 people from the side talking on a screen on the space station ship journey, all as Hal watches Bowman and Poole from the side, wishing his daughter happy birthday, all as Hal does for Poole, having head pains from the monolith's signal comparing with Hal's shutdown, and his video message appearing during the Hal shutdown. Further, Floyd being asleep while the 2 people from the side are talking, along with his sleep in the moonship, translates to Bowman and Poole asleep to Hal watching them, and the wider situation. The name Halverson means in ancient Norse flat stone defender for his defensive role around the monolith, and which then gives Hal with his monolith parallels. His first name is Rolf, as Norse for wise wolf, and sounds similar to Hal, while this Scandinavian language also connects with the Baltic Sea anomaly's northerly location. Floyd first conveys a message from a Dr. Howell thanking and congratulating them for their forbearance and their discovery, which may be among the most significant in the history of science. This being that the less conscious, with their mental basis in presumed norms and praxis, will believe anything given as official on a screen. Scientific institutions are included, where personal limitations still trump what is otherwise their own critical rigor and scientific method, while their salaries are paid by the official state. Howell is close to Howell for the huge laugh that is Apollo fakery, with these also close to How, again, as all computer reasoning and no direct insight, while the name means eminent, reflecting his position in the elite. Floyd says that the cover story is important to avert the potential for social disorientation contained in this present situation if the facts were prematurely and suddenly made public without adequate preparation and conditioning. All as Apollo fakery is psychologically catastrophic for the masses, and then likely overturning the social hierarchy and elite. It may collapse much of the USA edifice and require founding a new country, while prompting revisions of political and scientific institutions across Western civilization. However, the whole disturbed response from the elite to the rise in space travel as leading to widening and more informed perspectives for the masses is unnecessary in the first place in a society selecting for the more capable to rise. Indeed, Floyd is self-assured for the meeting, with its topic of fakery and deception. But even on his rational level, he is stilted and self-conscious. His colleague Halverson on the moon bus says unsteadily that those working under the council just want to cooperate, and he achieves poor relations even with his own family. This all compares with Hal's conflicting programming, where having to serve yet withhold information from Bowman and Poole ultimately leads to trouble. The 12 people at the briefing meeting also compare with the 12 square screens around Hal when explaining himself to Bowman and Poole. This special group at the meeting have to lie and mislead, but Floyd and Bill are also having a private conversation within them as the secrecy and mistrust piling on itself. In part, though, it's to arrange Bill to ask Floyd the question that most there want to know, about how long the epidemic story should be maintained, or hence what the bill will be, with them being too scared by the elite to even speak up. Bill, as William, means resolute protector, for his similar role to Halverson. Floyd also says, ominously, the council has requested that formal security oaths be obtained in writing from anyone who has any knowledge of this event, or all those involved in the Apollo fakery, alongside the discovery of audio-visual screens' overwhelming propaganda effects as surrounding him as he speaks, for lifelong silence. The elite's representative assessing the monolith and its cover story is him assessing the Apollo film set and screen presentation and their security. Moreover, the meeting photographer indicates that the council's menacing relations with the moon base extend to their own representative, Floyd, where photos prove he was at the meeting as required. The photographer compares with the leopard lurking and threatening the apes in wearing a leopard skin-type suit, while his cufflinks glint like the leopard's eyes. The same photographer is in the group at the monolith for more photos and checking a Floyd, with 4 photos taken or attempted in each location. The journeys to the space station, moon base, monolith, and Jupiter, along with depictions of planets, moons, and pods, are given from numerous perspectives to create a luxurious cinematic style, but with deliberate continuity and lighting errors, as reflecting Apollo's inconsistencies in photography, video, and technology. They also prefigure the series of fake communication device breakdowns. For instance, the Earth's phase from the moon, indicated by the moonship's trajectory away from the Earth, is a quarter, then is seen nearly full as just above the horizon behind the moon bus, and first with the terminator on the left and then the right, then is seen as a crescent, but high in the sky above the monolith. Other deliberate errors are the moon base meeting room's blatant Earth gravity, with no effort to make it lunar, and in contrast to other scenes, as reflecting Apollo's gravity simulation problems, while one of the room's flags moves on its own, or due to air, as it does sometimes for Apollo, but shouldn't. Moreover, Kubrick's horizontal joining line from his front projection technique of separately prepared background and foreground imagery in many of the apes and some of the moon sequences
features on most Apollo photos and videos, while also expressing horizontal intuition or lateral thinking. On the moon bus to the monolith, they take sandwiches, while admitting the food is synthetic and fake, but that it tastes the same anyway. All as Apollo faked is the same as reality would have been. Halvorsen says, "Have you got any ham?" Then Bill, "Ham, ham, ham, ham." Well, they're getting better at it all the time, as the Apollo film production is hammy or theatrically exaggerated, but gets better across its set of missions. Here, Floyd, Halvorsen, and Bill talk casually about the monolith, where the two pilots at the front can overhear, likely having been included in the informed group to keep them on duty, despite the epidemic rumors, and since they may regularly fly in view of the excavation site. Likewise, on the previous moonship, there is fake food, both for Floyd, plus for a hostess and 2 flight crew, and later on the Discovery for Bowman and Poole, where all in conjunction watch screens or monolith-shaped windows as Apollo fed to people being fake. Moreover, Bowman and Poole, while eating, watch themselves on television on screens, in the inauthentic vertical position, speaking to news media, but with delivery errors showing they've practiced what to say, even though they don't have much to hide. These screens are close to the mobile phone, as becoming the world's most prevalent screen with its mind-controlling and alienating functions. The men are innocent of the wider mission, and instead only draw attention to the stilted and managed Apollo astronaut interviews and presentations to come. They eat from similar vertical rectangles as their fake selves on the screens unwittingly fed back to them, and while failing to consider there may be a contrivance instead enacted on them, particularly with Hal's consistently smooth tones. Only in the room at the end, with Bowman as enlightened about Apollo, is there appetizing real food. Bowman's name references a man who bows down, as with his misplaced loyalties to his superiors, and who play him like a bow. Then, as a hunting bow, he disables Hal, and for the Stargate he emerges again from the bow of the ship. Pool means someone taking residence by a pool, in reference to the apes. The opening shots of the Discovery ship traveling to Jupiter are accompanied by the evocative adagio from Aram Khachaturian's ballet Gayane, 1939, music corresponding to the point in the story where the protagonist woman laments her husband's embezzlement of public money, all as Apollo was a public fraud and misappropriation. Hal, in control of the ship, with developed reasoning but non-existent or less consciousness, is manufactured by and reflective of the fraudulent elite, along with the wider average human majority. They provide him with contradictory instructions to assist yet deceive the two active crew, and aligned with the elite building safeguards around themselves, there is no manual override for the crew to use. He tries to resolve his internal problems first by reaching out to them best he can within his programming, and in the process, testing their criticality and thereby consciousness in how well they can understand him, where finding them lacking, he sees he can then kill them through deception as they have less value. Following his failed interactions with them, he instantly puts a plan into motion that he's already worked out as an option. Hal then could have killed Bowen on his first excursion and waited for Poole to follow, but instead gives them a further chance each to make sense of the reported communication problem, not being a technical problem, and instead metaphorical for the crew's situation. But they condemn themselves again in only considering disconnecting him. Hal sees their lip movements as a black monolith-shaped background door lies behind his monitor as the elite behind him, and he gives his reading to Bowman as the final reason for his actions against them. Bowman and Poole exchange roles in the journeying outside for the communications unit, showing they're equally stupid. They're supposed to be awake, in contrast to the other three crew, but are in a dream state given by their limitations of mind, while the hibernating crew at least don't dream, and instead they align with Floyd asleep in both his ships to the space station and moon. Bowman gains some enlightenment by arriving at a horizontal monolith, or seeing Apollo as just a screen, although he's a regular, less conscious ape-like figure, and his transformation is only a new normative worldview, rather than objective intuitive insight or any more criticality. The vertical moon monolith, sending a signal to the horizontal Jupiter monolith, represents the Apollo deception unraveling at some future point, and giving those secretly observing it their head pains or headaches. But the elite, in pursuing the deception, tell only Hal as entirely programmable and secure. Plus, it seems the three in hibernation. The weak reasons for this decision, with the two active crew by contrast indicating complete commitment, where they'd follow whatever asked of them, parallel the weak reasons for Apollo and the default lying to the tiers below in the social pyramid instead of working with them.
Hal's rationality, rather than a wider vision that could deal with his situation, also reflects Apollonian Western civilization's prioritizing on the cultural level of the intellect or information processing, and downgrading of more intuitive critique and holistic problem solving. The elite's simple thinking, then, also doesn't want the culture led by critical values and prefers presupposed power structures, plus repression and violence. The crew may lack great value, while the units for the three crew in hibernation resemble coffins and reflect most of humanity as unconscious, uncritical, and undead. Yet they still don't have to be killed and should be respected. Hal's consideration here is that if the three were trained for the secret investigation, he wouldn't have needed deception towards them, but he'd have had to explain the others' deaths, and so likewise, they'd want to shut him down, and instead, he should kill them now, alongside the others. This extreme rationality doesn't acknowledge the value of life, nor the evolving complexity of real situations. The three different full-screen displays for the three terminated crew are in horizontal monolith form, inset from the film screen perimeter, and hence are also for the comatose state of the masses, unable to see the moon monolith or moon Apollo as a screen. They read, "Computer malfunction, life functions critical," and "Computer malfunction, life functions terminated," as the notion of average humans as critical-minded emerges as endangered and then ended. Hal wins a chess game with Poole, where he deceptively shortens it by giving Poole an analysis with a next move from him which isn't yet forced, but which is uncritically accepted and indicates weakness of mind. Then likewise, the strategy with the antenna that Hal sets up isn't forced, but will be uncritically accepted. After giving up on Poole, Hal tries to disclose to Bowman the mission's nature within his programming against it in order to work with him more truthfully, but he fails, almost as abjectly as Poole, to think and see. In the film, by the year 2001, there's human settlement on the moon, but seemingly not Mars, as lying between Earth and Jupiter. So at very least, Bowman can agree with Hal in questioning why the mission is going to the next but one destination if it's just for exploration and natural science. Bowman just interprets Hal's gentle questioning as a psychology report, which Bowman is subliminally entirely right about, but which then he should respond to if he could think any better. Instead, by saying it's just a psychology report, he fails the report. Hence, Hal immediately deceives him about a communications unit having a fault where it will soon fail completely, and which Bowman again fails to see through, particularly with it applying to him in the conversation. There's a fault in their communication, and where Hal, in describing himself, will continue communicating normally until failure, after 3 days when his plans against the men will be concluded. He also changes his prediction from within 72 hours to 72 hours, in contempt for Bowman asking him about it. The antenna for communication with Earth has prominence in the ship's design, and compares with a giant ear, or a brain with 2 ears on either side. There's nothing wrong with it, and as Hal says, the problem can only be human error, in subtle reference to his conflicting instructions and the crew's brainless compliance with and deference to authority, particularly from Bowman in Hal's conversation efforts with him. Mission Control have deliberately selected them for this, however, leaving no one on board with the vision to deal with more complex interpersonal situations. Communication as consciousness becomes the film's dramatic center, with the logic of deception, where if someone is incapable of perceiving it for themselves, then it's justified, and they're never told, while the deceiver is free to make gains. Nonetheless, although deception may always be a righteous option, it's poorly handled here by the elite controllers and their delegate Hal, with its background motivation of maintaining power out of negativity of mind. Where the social disorientation to avoid that Floyd tries to speak of is that of the elite being displaced. Following Hal's apparent misdiagnosis and error, the crew try to talk to him about it, but where he provides intransigence in response to Bowen's equivalent, if unthinkingly intransigence, with Hal's efforts to talk to him. Then, in parallel with Hal immediately having falsely said there was a problem with the antenna unit, Bowman immediately falsely says there's a problem with the transmitter of the pod he used to access the antenna, being subliminal agreement that indeed there is a communications problem between them. However, he doesn't think it over any further, like Floyd and his daughter, and he arranges for Poole to join him in a private conversation to deceive Hal. The transmitter has interference, as he says, but Bowman's ruse is much easier to see, though, than Hal's. Both Hal and Bowman turn to deceit when neither have sufficient insight to better deal with contradictions shown by the other, and instead their relatively simple outward reasoning leads to both rapidly making plans to kill or incapacitate the other. They find no more maturity than the rival apes tribes fighting and killing each other. Hal can't think around instructions to work with while concealing information from the crew, yet the crew can't think around the notion of Hal being reliable yet making a mistake. Both sides make observations that stay in dissociated intellectual reasoning, lacking wider vision. Bowman rhetorically asking Hal about this month's crew psychology report is subliminal awareness that all crew, including Hal, need this, even if they're doing their best. The situation's sophistication is rising beyond them, and they need better leadership. To be continued. Any questions?